Welcome back to this very special Indonomics. I'm speaking with the chief economist of the IMF, Dr. Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas. Let me come to India. We've had a fairly good growth in services exports, especially the middle office that seems to be moving, what are called global captive centers seem to be moving. Is this a secular trend, you think, or are there limits to it because of probably potential tariffs and inward-looking policies?
Well, that's a big question. I don't think anyone really has the answer to the question you're asking. But certainly, what I would want to say is that the external sector has a big role to play in India's development and growth trajectory going forward, as it has in many other countries that have emerged and taken their place on the global stage. And I think there, you're right to point out that we are in a more challenging environment globally. We've talked about countries putting trade restrictive measures, and that's likely to continue. Now, one advantage in looking at India, I can see two. One is the fact that, well, like other large economies, it can benefit from a very large domestic market. So it should do all it can to really make sure that the domestic market reaches its full potential, and a number of reforms can help in that direction. And the second is that India's exports are strong, in particular when you look at services exports. And that's an area where we haven't seen as many trade restrictive measures being put in place. I mean, it's not as liberalized as goods trade. There are still a number of types of services trade are very restricted, but in the sectors where India is very strong, whether it's telecommunication or IT and technology more generally, there is a potential for growth in services exports, and we've seen that. And so I think this is offering an avenue for, among many, it's not the only one, of course, but it's one of the avenues of growth for the Indian economy going forward.
No, okay, I'll tell you the context in which I'm asking you this. There is a feeling that we are at a sweet spot that China was in 1991. The demographic dividend is just kicking in. The exports, again, the demography is giving you the advantage of services exports. Tax to GDP, I don't know, I want your view. Taxes have risen more than expected for the past 2 years. So there is a hope that as we cross, $2,600 per capita, tax to GDP will kick in. Do you think that we stand a very good chance of an improved secular growth trend? The last 20 years is about 6.5, 6.6. So is there a good chance of stepping up?
I think it will really depend critically on the type of reforms that are put in place and whether they get really to some of the core bottlenecks in the context of India's economy. Now, you mentioned that India's can benefit from the demographic dividend, and that's absolutely true, unlike many other parts of the world, and it's certainly something that India should capitalize on. But it also requires that the labor force that is going to be coming, and the demographic dividend means that you have a low dependency ratio, you have a lot of workers coming on the market, that they're equipped with the tools that they need to be really entering into this global economy. So education, whether it's basic education or higher education, participation of all categories of workers, including women in the labor force, those are areas where there can be big improvements. And so with the right reforms, I think there is certainly room there. Then in addition to what's happening on the labor supply side, there's everything that can happen on the productivity side. And this is where also a lot of things can be done. Now you mentioned the increase in tax revenues. Now some of that could be coming in particular in India from the fact that there has been a very successful digitalization effort in the last few years. Really, India is a leading example in that area. And potentially, this can allow a lot of workers and a lot of businesses to move from informality to the formal sector, and therefore, by extension, provide a source of revenues for the government that can then be reinvested in educating infrastructure, human capital, productivity reforms, and then it's a virtuous cycle.
Yes, that's what I was, we are all hoping that it will kick in a virtuous cycle. But let me just point out the historical examples. There is an economist who has done this numbers. India is, the target set by the Prime Minister is that we can become a developed country, an advanced economy, high income economy, only if we grow at maybe 7.6% for the next 25 years. Now, prevailing examples of over 7% growth for 25 years are only 13 in number, according to this economist. And they happen, you know, most of them are Asian tigers in Japan, happened between mid-60s and mid-90s. And China was the big one from 1990 to 2012. But all of them have one thing in common: they grew because of exports. Therefore, how do you look at the global ecosystem? Will it be helpful in India, you know, stepping up its growth?
Well, it is going to be more challenging perhaps than it was for some of these countries that were embarking on an industrialization process at a time when there was maybe a lot more room to grow in that space, and now that space is perhaps a little bit more crowded, and we get also you know, a global environment that is a little bit less tolerant of growth there. But at the same time, there is really no option there. I mean, I think as you pointed out, most of the successful growth strategies have relied on making sure that domestic firms are confronted to foreign competition, making sure that foreign capital, and by foreign capital, often what really is important is foreign technology as well, can come in. So having a foreign direct investment regime that is going to be favorable for foreign investors to really want to come in and invest and bring their technology and know-how, so that there can be a rapid catch-up to the technology frontier in areas where India might still be behind, and then having a framework that allows for more innovation once the country is at the frontier. That is absolutely critical, and don't think that there is any path forward that can be just inward looking. So there isn't really an option there. Now, the good news is that this is a much broader economy. Also, if you compare it now, the global economy is much broader now than it was maybe 40 years ago. And so there are many more opportunities. And in particular, what this means is that the growth opportunities are not just in trading with advanced economies. They are becoming a smaller share of the global economy. It's also in trading with other emerging market economies where there is growth potential and where there can be also healthy competition that delivers productivity gains. So I think that there is a sense in which there is plenty of space, and in some of the work we've done at the IMF, we emphasize also that the environment may become challenging, but there are also opportunities. There are opportunities for countries that are not, for instance, that are able to engage in trade on all sides and can benefit from the current situation.
I mean, so far we've benefited from technology, telecommunications, and we are hoping AI as well. But that's a huge topic. I don't think we'll have time for that. I just wanted a final question, because I noted that you have written a lot on climate change. Would you worry that that is likely to take away some part of potential growth in every country? And is there any hope that climate financing will rise to the challenge?
Well, on the first part of your question, I think climate, the climate transition is also a source of opportunities. I mean, and certainly if you think about the green supply chains, I mean, we basically need to electrify all our production processes, and that requires building production processes for clean electricity, then having storage and batteries, etc. So there is an entire supply chain that needs to come online, and we're seeing that happening, and that's a source of job creation. We're seeing also, it's something we've looked at, what are the job implications of the green transition, and they are not necessarily major. They can be very concentrated, so we should pay attention to the distribution issues, but they are not in the aggregate necessarily very large. So I think there are opportunities there where it's not really at the expense of growth, especially if you think about emerging economies where there is a need to grow. For instance, the power grid needs to grow. If you think about more advanced economies, mature economies, it's a question of substitution. You need to replace what you already have with maybe renewables. And so that's costly because you have already some equipments that are installed, you need to replace them. But in the case of emerging market economies, the overall energy supply needs to go tremendously. And so the question is how to make sure that that additional growth is as green as possible, and then at the same time start thinking about replacing and retiring some of the existing. But that existing infrastructure is a smaller fraction of the total infrastructure that needs to be put in place in the next, let's say, 20 years. So I think these are growth opportunities for emerging and developing countries, and perhaps more so than for other countries.
Okay, that looks very hopeful. Pierre Gourinchas, thank you very much for spending time with us and giving us the hope that if so many countries grew over 7% for 25 years, the ecosystem can allow India also to at least attempt that challenge. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.